And thank you for joining us on Prairie Doc Radio. We hope that if you have questions of any nature, you will call us at 692-1430. We're going to focus a little bit about gastrointestinal issues because our television show this week is on anything gastrointestinal. So if you have questions that have anything to do with the mouth down to the exit, give us a call and we'll specifically, address some diet issues. So good morning, Rick.
Good morning, Joni. I enjoyed you bringing that up. I'm generally the one that you roll the eyes on when I bring up. You said exit. The exit.
Nicely.
I think about the exit periodically. It's maybe the exit to you, but it's bread and butter to me. That's But sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Welcome to Kayla.
Well,
she is the dietitian.
Kayla, it's very
Hy-Vee.
nice to have you.
Yes, thanks
here.
for having me.
So, we're talking about upper GI mostly. We're going to have tomorrow night Tim Ridgway, who is really a great gastroenterologist from Sioux Falls, mostly involved with the School of Medicine now more and more. And some of the topics that we're going to bring up will be things like celiac disease, milk intolerance, malnourishment, reflux esophagitis, and that's kind of the dietitian's bailiwick, is it not?
It can be, and certainly I've been seeing the last couple of days. I've gotten quite a few questions with just people even worried about FODMAPs and that kind of diet that they're trying to follow, the FODMAPs diet.
So don't know what the FODMAPs diet
well,
is.
that's against anything that's fermentable oligosaccharides, the sugar alcohols. They have issues with their small intestine and their large intestine absorbing those, so they get a lot of, it's usually related to IBS a lot of the time. So
Right, yeah.
That's something I'm seeing a lot more in the store.
So now IBS, meaning irritable bowel syndrome, and the classic symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome would be what?
A lot of that's going to be gas, bloatiness, discomfort, diarrhea, constipation. Some people will go from one extreme to the other, unfortunately.
So what foods are you talking about that they would avoid?
So there's certain fruits that you're going to avoid. Apples is kind of on the top of that list. You can usually do different vegetables. It depends on the ratio of glucose to fructose. So if it has more than a 1-to-1 ratio, you have to stay away from that particular fruit, vegetable. Obviously no artificial sweeteners of any kind. I have a couple of lists, and usually they'll get handed a list from their doctor too, saying these are the ones you need to avoid. But apples tend to be the highest ones. Certain citrus fruits you have to stay away from as well. So, but just like anything with the bowel, it's kind of a individualized thing. So not one thing works for everybody.
I had a great case of a gentleman who had been told he had IBS, this irritable bowel syndrome with constipation, diarrhea, bloating, gas problems, gallbladder symptoms, and never a gallbladder problem, so on and so forth. And I said, you could have celiac disease, and I tested him with the tissue transglutaminase antibody, which is the blood test, the TTG antibody test that shows that you've developed an antibody against this particular type of protein, therefore the indicator for celiac disease. And he didn't have it, And I thought, oh boy, I thought for sure you had celiac disease. But before he left and before we had the TTG antibody test, I kind of went through avoiding all of the things that can cause, that have celiac symptoms, the gluten diet. So I put him on a gluten-free diet for a week while we were waiting the TTG antibody test. And he said, my problem went away immediately with the gluten-free diet. So then there's this whole thing in the medical literature that say, well, some people have gluten sensitivity, except they don't have positive testing. They may not have celiac disease, but they have gluten intolerance. What do you think about that?
I have a lot of people that come in and tell me that thing because they're looking for a gluten-free diet. Usually one of my first questions is, well, when were you diagnosed with celiac disease? And they usually tell me, well, I haven't been, but I do have a sensitivity to it. So then we just, I kind of guide them along through the store and figure out what can we do, what changes can we make? Are they going to, if it's a sensitivity, they don't have to be quite as cautious maybe about completely avoiding it, but they still, just for their own comfort level, want to get it out as much as possible too. So we go through the store and not just the health market, because now we're getting so many more items mainstream from, main companies that we're used to seeing that are putting out a gluten-free product. And then there's just lots of things that are naturally gluten-free that you can just reassure them that you can continue to eat this and you'll be just fine.
Right.
Why do you think that is, Rick? What's going on in their gut?
Well, if you think about it, let's say the 300 million years, the 3 million years human-like beings were walking on the earth, and for the last 200,000 or 300,000 years, where we have been hunters and gatherers, and really 10,000 years ago when we discovered wheat, it was on the side. They know exactly where that wheat was discovered, on the side of one mountain between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. That was the origin of farming. And the wheat was discovered, and then they would plant the wheat seed, and then they plant it again, and it spread throughout Europe and the world. And after that, the idea of having to run after the antelopes, why don't we just put them in a cage and or the whatever it is, and we ended up with ranching to go along with the farming. And then we got corn.
That's not explaining the gut.
But the point is all these years we didn't have wheat. We didn't have grains that were grazed up until only just a blink of the eye ago in human age, 10,000 years ago.
But why does a person who's eaten gluten, eaten bread, and then like your example, all of a sudden this person's having problems?
I think it's not all of a sudden. I mean, people who have gluten-sensitive enteropathy, commonly they don't know that they have this gluten sensitivity until they get into trouble. I had a patient who presented with iron deficiency, anemia, and weight loss. I had another patient who had neuropathy. And it's interesting, the man who had neuropathy,
Neuropathy,
numbness and tingling in his fingers and his feet, and it started to ascend. It was a B12 deficiency associated with gluten sensitivity, and in his whole life he'd been intolerant of lettuce. Once he realized that glucose that gluten was the problem, he was able to tolerate lettuce. He was able to tolerate milk. Milk was another thing.
Well, it wasn't that he couldn't tolerate; he thought he couldn't.
Right, and my point
There you
was
go.
that people who have gluten sensitivity have weird deals, and that you don't always know that you have it. Now that we have a blood test, we test all the family members, and we're discovering it. People don't know that they've got it until bad things happen. So it's something that's kind of a sliding. You slide into it, and I think that people who don't have celiac disease but who have gluten sensitivity just find that they feel a whole lot better off of it. Then we were, and back to the original point, we were hunter-gatherers all these years without wheat, without the things that are raised on a farm, that are part of the farming story, and that we were built this way, and it's only been 10,000 years of change that has brought us to be able to tolerate these things, including milk. Milk was another one.
We need to take our first break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more and get the dietitian's view on this. So you're listening to Prairie Doc Radio. Call us with your questions, 692-1430, and we'll be right back. Back to Prairie Doc Radio. We're happy to have you listening. We have Dr. Rick Holm in studio. We have Kayla Amon, a dietitian, in studio, and I'm Joni Holm, filling in for Joan Hogan. So tell us, Kayla, what do you see a lot of people that have a need to eliminate gluten in their diet, and What do you recommend?
I do, and it kind of comes in spurts. Sometimes it seems like, and sometimes you'll see people that do have true celiac disease, and some that have the gluten sensitivity. But sometimes the ones that are gluten sensitive almost have more signs and symptoms than the ones that have celiac. Because you'll get a person that comes in and says, "Well, I have celiac disease, but I don't. If I do happen to eat a little bit of wheat, rye, or barley, I don't feel bad about it. Like I don't have a symptom." But then you have those that don't have it, so they have gluten sensitivity, and they just catch a whiff of it seems like, and they're having the worst day ever. So it's just kind of interesting, the two extremes. But what I do is try and meet them where they're at. I mean, if they're struggling with breads or pastas, or trying to find a product that tastes good, that they like, that has the texture and consistency that they're looking at, we try and work around as much of that we can. And since I started at the store 4.5 years ago, the gluten-free products that we have has increased immensely, which has been a lot more helpful. They've gotten to taste a lot better. The price point on some of them is still a little bit high, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of the nature of the beast with any food allergy or insensitivity, it seems like.
So tell us, what are the foods that are gluten containing? What are the major gluten?
So anything that has wheat, rye, or barley, or comes from them, or a derivative of them. Wheat goes by lots of different names. You have farro, you have semolina, you've got durum, malt is another one that people have to watch out for. There's quite a list. So you have your obvious things, your pastas, your breads, those grains, obviously. But then you've got items that go into like a processed product that might have a derivative of wheat, but it's not always clearly marked on the label. So you have to kind of watch out for all of those items too. So it's a lot of label reading. Yeah, thickeners. I mean, some can be corn derived, which would be fine, but then you've got some that are wheat derived. So you're like, we have to watch out for those. And it did help when they came out with the labeling law, where the top 8 major allergens have to be on it. So wheat's always going to show up on the food label, but rye and barley don't have to be listed at the bottom where it says contains, soy, sesame, and milk or something like that. So that it's a lot of label reading. It's a lot of getting used to certain products and finding what you like. The first couple times you're going to come grocery shopping, I'm more than willing to come and go through the store with you, but then you'll become familiar with those products that you're constantly buying. So you'll know where they're at in the store. You'll know which ones taste better than the other ones. And we'll go through and help, kind of get that all figured out. That's what I'm there for.
So if you like pizza, or if you like pasta, or you like wheat-based products, there's rice flour, correct?
There's rice flour, there's potato flour, tapioca are all different options that you can have. And we've got different pizza crusts that are gluten-free, some that are frozen, some that are out on the shelf that are shelf stable you can have. There's a couple companies that make frozen pizza that some of us are used to having as well. If you like macaroni and cheese, there's companies that make that, or you can find a noodle that you really like and make your own version of it at home. So there's lots of ways to adapt the way you currently eat to it. And even if you look at like some of your condiments, like barbecue sauce, Cookie's barbecue sauce has always been gluten-free. They just never had to worry about putting that on their label. Now they've put it on the back side of their label. So lots of companies are starting to sneak in the GF, or say that it's gluten-free, even if they always have been, but now they're just making it easier for customers to recognize those products, especially if it's one that they like and isn't tried and true and they're a staple in their diet.
It's interesting that when Jack Barker and I first talked about gluten sensitivity,
Jack Barker is a
gastroenterologist, now retired, but it was like 12 years ago, 13 years ago on our TV show. I went after that trip to the grocery store to find gluten-free, and there was very little. It's amazing. There was rice flour, and there was just very little. Yeah,
and you'd almost have to go to a specialty food store, or used to have to, and now it's, our health markets, all our Hy-Vees have such a good selection of those, and the dietitians are very knowledgeable on the products and stuff. Granted, we haven't eaten all the products, but we've got a pretty good idea of what's going on.
And one of the things that Barker said was that if you have gluten sensitivity, that means that, if you have celiac disease, you eat a little bit of gluten, and you develop a small intestine, the first part of the small intestine, that gets very inflamed, and that inflammation takes away your absorption of certain elements, and that inflammation makes you intolerant of milk, so that if you get celiac disease, by the way, controlled, then your milk tolerance can come back. And that inflammation is, in most people who have celiac disease, occurs with a very small amount of gluten. So that if you have celiac disease, you should avoid, it's all or none. I mean, it's none. You do not even take little bits of it. Now, if you're a milk intolerant person, you can take a little bit more milk and then you get a little loosened stool and you can use it as a laxative. But not so with gluten. You just don't want to do a little bit of gluten because that inflammation in the small intestine can be occurring. Is that how you took it, Kayla?
Yep, and then because the diet is the only way to control celiac disease. There's no pill, there's no medication, there's no other treatment other than cutting gluten completely out of your diet.
Yeah.
Let's take our second break, and I think we need to back up and just go over the symptoms of celiac disease when we come back, because we kind of stepped over that step. But we'll take a break and we'll be right back. Prairie Doc Radio, thank you for listening. We will take your questions at 692-1430, and we have a question, but I want to quickly finish up on celiac disease.
Right. Well, Bob had one good question before. Why don't you ask that question?
What question was that? What did Bob?
That was animals that eat. You know, let's talk animals that eat
Grain-fed animals.
Grain-fed animals, eggs. Chickens that eat grain. Do you carry the celiac disease, intolerant
Through the meat.
Through the meat. Like answer, Kayla.
And I haven't seen anything that would show that you would, and I don't see how that would happen. So I think you'll be completely fine eating eggs and meat that are grain-fed,
Right.
grain-fed animals.
Totally agree with that. Right.
Okay.
And we do have. You were going to ask.
Let's just back up and just give a little bit of symptoms. We've just so briefly mentioned that it could be constipation or diarrhea, but give me an example of what would make a person want to go in and talk to their care provider about celiac disease. What
I think
symptoms?
anybody with irritable bowel syndrome, in other words, constipation, diarrhea, gut problems, bloating, all those things, gallbladder type symptoms, intolerance to certain foods, anything along that line, or a family history of celiac disease should have the TTG antibody test. Now, a person, it's interesting, if you're a celiac person who gets tested for TTG antibody, and it's sky high and you've got celiac disease, wow, you have it. You have an antibody. There's an inflammatory, allergic-like reaction going on in your small intestine. So you put them on a celiac diet and you test them again in 6 months with a TTG antibody. It'll be normal.
Because they're not eating wheat.
And so a person who says, gee, I think I might have celiac disease, comes in and says, can I have a blood test for it? And I said, sure. And I test them, it's normal. And then I ask them, have you been on a celiac diet? Oh, yeah, I've been on a completely free celiac diet for 3 months, And the answer is, well, then that'll make your test turn normal. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would clue you in on is that people who have that malabsorption problem can have weird malabsorption symptoms, like the 2 cases I presented to you. One was iron deficiency. The person was bleeding, and the only way I made that diagnosis, that was just pure luck, was that I had an EGD done where he's passed the scope down the esophageal gastroduodenoscopy through the esophagus, into the stomach, into the duodenum. And there's some weird inflammatory process going on, and the gastroenterologist, well, actually our surgeon, biopsied the heck out of the small intestine, and the biopsies came back. This is consistent with celiac disease. Could the person have celiac disease? And the answer was, oops, and yes.
So the inflammation of the bowel can be severe enough that there's some microscopic bleeding.
Right, the high level of the small intestine. And so that person had iron deficiency anemia, was losing weight. The people who knew him were afraid he was going to die from it. And he could have. And the second patient presented with a neuropathy, you know, a weird B12 deficiency, so a malabsorption once again. So it's weird symptoms, unusual
Okay, so if
things.
you have unusual gut symptoms, talk with your provider.
There it is, have the blood test.
I guess that's what you're
Kayla,
planning.
any other comments? Milk intolerance might be a clue too, because you get milk intolerance, secondary milk intolerance.
Yeah, sometimes those two do go a little bit of hand in hand, but like you said, if you get the one under control, you'll be able to tolerate milk, or at least certain kinds of milk. Some people will handle cottage cheese, some can handle yogurt. Might not be able to drink a glass of milk again, but you might be able to handle some of those other forms of milk.
All right. We do have a question that has come in, and why don't we get to that so that we won't get carried away and miss it. This caller asked
Carried
about...
away? Could we get carried away?
This caller asked about cataract surgery and wants to know what is the best anesthetic that to be used, and should they ask for a certain anesthetic?
Right. I think that you leave that up to the ophthalmologist, because she or he are going to want you immobile so they can do the surgery, and so certainly, when they're injecting the eye with different things and so on and so forth, and manipulating back there, they may not want you awake and moving around. Now, I've had both cataracts removed, and they use the same drug that they use with colonoscopies, which is propofol, which is a wonderful anesthetic agent. Not a great drug for regular, usual nighttime sleep. Michael Jackson will
Attest to
that issue. But it's a great anesthetic agent, and that's what they've used for my cataracts, both of them.
And you come out of it easily.
Come out of it easily. And, if you say, it's up to you, doc, that's a good answer. Another one is, I've heard propofol is really good. Could I have a Michael Jackson sleep, but just one time?
Let's leave Michael out of it.
Okay.
Okay. We should take our third break, and then we'll come back with further questions about the gastrointestinal system. Kayla Amon, and I'm Joni home in studio today. We're talking about gastrointestinal issues.
I thought a good question Bob just asked, and I'll ask you, Joni, was the question about peanut allergies. You deal with little kids who have peanut allergies. Why is that happening more and more nowadays?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to why we're seeing it, and that was the consensus here in the studio. You don't have any great answers, do you?
Well, I read recently that if you give your kids, or if you eat peanuts when you've got a baby in your belly, that your kids will have less chance of peanut allergy. And it's that old hygiene theory. Exposure when you're young prevents the allergic reaction, or the problems that you get older, the autoimmune problems that you can have. It's interesting, as we've cleaned up our act and the world has gotten less and less infections, then the increase in autoimmune diseases, the rheumatoid arthritis, the lupus, the maybe celiac disease, maybe peanut allergy, these autoimmune.
Not buying it.
You don't believe it?
Well, we pregnant women, or I'm not pregnant now, but in the past, have not
Caleb.
decreased our peanut intake to the point of having problems. Is there a reduction in peanut
But
intake in
you've heard
pregnant
that story
women?
about
No.
peanut exposure in children. I read that just this
Not in
last.
pregnant women, I haven't.
Well, I read the
Have you,
exposure
Karen?
of children, exposure early to some kind of peanut product.
Yeah, and I've heard kind of you said a little bit early, but they sometimes still they don't recommend like protein type foods till kids are closer to 9 months. But I've been eating I eat peanut butter sandwich every night before I go to bed, so my kids should be just fine. I
Yeah,
hope
that's
that's
right.
the
There you
case
go.
because I love peanut butter. It's my go-to protein for an evening snack. That's for sure.
Joni, when do you add proteins to? And there's this story about adding milk too early, but not too late.
Well, I don't recommend peanuts until after a year.
Okay.
And after 2 years if there's an allergy in the family.
Okay.
for peanuts.
But milk.
After a year for milk. But kids eat meat products. They can eat, at 9 months, 10 months. I don't think they necessarily need a lot of it, but that's protein.
When do you start anything besides breast milk? It's 6 months, isn't it? Already?
Between 4 and 6, and there's been some changes recently. Some people, years ago it was at about 4 months, and then it got really solid 6 months, and now there's a little bit of a push to go back toward between the 4 and 6. So I don't have a good answer. I think it depends on the baby. You want to look at their development. Are they aware of food? Do they have good head control and back control? And those are some of the signs that they have readiness to eat. There was people said that when their baby started drooling, that would show they're ready. Well, heck, every baby drools way early, and so drooling is not necessarily one of those signs
And
of readiness
I found
to eat.
myself drooling lately, so I mean, maybe I'm ready to eat too. I don't know, Bob. I don't know. So anyway.
What are your thoughts, Kayla, on starting solids?
Yeah, I think like a lot of what you said, when they'll kind of tell you when they're ready. If they have good head control, they're not throwing their tongue so much forward when they're nursing or trying to have a bottle or things like that. And if they, are they hungry? I mean, if you just can't keep them fed and happy enough, which is with breast milk or formula, whatever you're doing, then maybe start to introduce a little bit of that rice cereal at that 4-month mark and see how they tolerate it.
Right.
Explain throwing your tongue forward. I
Tongue
didn't.
thrust.
Tongue thrust, yeah.
It's a common reflex that babies have. All babies have it, and with time they improve and they understand how to take a spoon. That's one of the reasons we recommend spoon feeding versus putting food in the bottle, because we want the child to figure out, and it takes time to learn a spoon, but it's part of speech development. It's part of understanding and using your mouth. So we do want babies to eat from a spoon versus a bottle.
I was thinking that tongue thrusting might occur mostly in the 3rd grade when all those girls were sticking their tongue out at you.
That might occur too. but
Yeah,
we're
it comes
talking
back.
about Infants, yes. we're
It
talking
comes
about
back or
infants.
something like that. So, what about duodenal ulcers? We're going to talk about a variety of different things. It used to be that we'd have severe bleeding ulcers, and then the treatment of choice was the sippy diet. Do you remember hearing that, Caitlin?
I have not heard of the sippy diet.
Oh, you're too young. The sippy diet was pure cream. You drink high levels of fatty foods to settle the coat the
Bad
stomach.
idea.
It didn't work. In fact, what happened is people would be started dying from vascular disease. Now that was the theory. I don't know if there's any solid scientific data,
Wow.
but they gained weight and had all sorts of problems associated with the sippy diet for ulcers. And it's interesting. We took people to surgery all the time. In fact, when I did my surgery rotation at Emory as a junior in med school, 72, 73, 74, 73, they were talking about the bread and butter surgery for general surgeons was to repair a duodenal ulcer. And you'd cut out that and you'd repair the front of you'd shorten the stomach and the duodenum and bring
Well,
it together.
what caused that? We don't have much time
Well,
here.
it's probably an H. pylori infection.
Right.
And we really solved a lot of the problems associated with that bleeding duodenal ulcer with Tagamet, which was cimetidine, which was the first Zantac kind of Pepsid kind of drug, the H2 blockers.
We didn't even get into that, and there's a lot of discussion that
Well,
we
that
might have
would-
to do another time.
Tomorrow night, you get all that information about whether you should use Tagamet or
7
Zantac
o'clock.
or Pepsid or Prilosec or
7 o'clock, public TV. And we also entertain questions at that time. So if you have questions about ulcers or
we love
reflux.
questions. Kayla, you make sure to throw those difficult dietary questions at us tomorrow night.
I will. I'll be calling in.
Okay.
Okay, we
So
are
Tim
at the-
Ridgway is just fabulous, and it ought to be good. Thank you both for being here, Bob, and stay healthy out there, people.